Good evening, and welcome to City Media Reporter. I'm Howard Homanoff, your executive producer and host for the program. This evening, I'm very excited to be welcoming Max Robbins, who's one of our most outstanding journalists and editors in the world of the media covering the media for a number of years at Variety, Broadcasting and Cable, and today at Forbes. Max, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here, Howard. Thank you.
I'm going to start off, and I'm going to make some news. We just came through the President's State of the Union, and I hear that you were just made the president of all news media.
No.
So Max, what's the state of the news media today?
Where do I begin? The thing is, I think that we're in really turbulent, challenging times, but where there's a lot of opportunity. I think we are beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's an incredibly tough time for those great legacy media brands. I mean, this week alone, we're seeing the Time Warner spinning off the Time Inc. magazine group. We've seen, layoffs at what was once a venerable title in one of the other places I used to work that was once the largest circulation magazine in America, TV Guide. You've seen a lot going on. But at the same time, you're seeing a lot of new ventures come about and that I think have a pretty good chance of getting some traction. Most recently, you see Ezra Klein is going to be doing has a new venture, and 4 people have left the Washington Post as of today to join him in that. I think that we're getting to a point in this digital world. Yes, there's a challenge in what the revenue model looks like, but we are seeing the cost of entry go way down to what it once was to get into this place. At the same time, where some of those legacy players are drifting down.
So in terms of the legacy sectors, if you will, let's take a look at print first. I mean, are we heading towards a place where in terms of traditional newspapers, the kind where I still, in the New York winter, still putter out my slippers and get my newspaper and bring it in the house, etc. Are we getting a point where the New York Times will be the only newspaper kind of left?
No, I don't think so. I think that there will still be some print, but primarily I think how people will get their news. I mean, I think the most important word and the most important thing to think about, and anybody in this business, and also to the end user, is mobile. I mean, increasingly, this is going to become a mobile experience. We live here in New York. If you're riding on the train, think about just 2 years ago, 18 months ago, if you counted the percentage of people who were looking at a tabloid like the New York Post or the Daily News or reading the New York Times, as opposed to people who are really immersed either in a smartphone or a tablet. I mean, it's huge, and depending on where you are and who those people are, there's a real transition. It doesn't mean that magazines will go away altogether. I mean, there are blacksmiths who still have jobs, but it's going to be much different, and there will be, I think, ways from the technology that will allow us, that will get even more advanced than the tablet, where you will kind of have a virtual newspaper. So you won't have to trundle out in your bathrobe and slippers in the snow and ice to pick up the newspaper.
Your mobile point reminds me, I don't know if you saw this, but recently some either posted it online or they took it from another source, but it was side-by-side pictures, and somebody said, everyone complains that the mobile world has made us all so insular and focused on our devices. And so there's a picture today of a commuter train and everybody on their mobile devices. And next to it is a picture of a commuter train from the 1960s, and everybody has their head buried in the newspaper, not talking to each other either. So I thought it was just interesting to see that they're both consuming news.
Absolutely.
Those are people who are generally want to know there's a lot more options, but they're focused on media consumption.
I mean, I just know myself, and that I'm not an early adapter in terms. I mean, I follow all this, the technology and the means of distribution and the that kind of the end user experience. But myself, I was a little bit late to the tablet, but in the last year, I would say 90 to 95% of the reading I do is on an iPad Mini. And it's radically different. That being said, it's really funny. Then what happens is, this was a few weeks ago. I was at a friend's house, and I happened to pick up a copy of Harper's Magazine, and there was and I said, "Hey, are you done with this?" He says, "Yeah," and I took it, and there was this very immersive experience and a way of discovery that's different from when you're reading a magazine on a tablet. And I found myself reading, not in my area of interest, this just terrific piece of long-form journalism. And it was just, in a way, it was really refreshing. It was a treat.
So, in terms of those financial models, and in the newspaper world, one of the probably biggest stories of the last year is Jeff Bezos buying the Washington Post. Do we need to have sort of the billionaire jump in to save some of these companies? Is that is it almost a philanthropic approach to get those to survive?
I don't think it's philanthropic. I think there's long been a case where people have look at people with a lot of money, look at kind of the long tail of investment in a brand name media property. And I think, but we're also at a place where it really helps if that billionaire, and this would be Jeff Bezos, really understands the science of the technology of efficient means of distribution. And that is, I think that's why his investment in the Washington Post is extremely significant. What you really want, and what we're seeing in kind of those new media properties, those digital media properties that are succeeding, like Huffington Post, like BuzzFeed, there's a real marriage of technology and content and understanding the value of brands. And really using the science to serve the journalism.
But BuzzFeed's in particular an really interesting kind of point or case study. And you hear all the time people talking about, young people aren't interested in news, they're not interested in news the way we kind of grew up consuming news. What's your take on kind of what the content of the news, and as well as the platform,
right.
Sort of the content of what it is? You look at BuzzFeed, look at Now This News, which is a kind of a sister company, similar investors, and kind of that short form sort of headline plus short form video type of thing. Is that what it takes to reach a younger audience? Is that just one of many models? What happens to actually what the news is?
I think that it's about, and I think it always has been, about creating a relationship with the end user. I think that too much, there's been a certain arrogance in legacy news organizations not to listen to the crowd enough, not to realize they're in a conversation. I think BuzzFeed gets that they're in a conversation. It's interesting that we know BuzzFeed for the listicles and that it's a fun, light read. But they've also added investigative reporting. They're building a whole international political coverage. They started a business section. And it's funny, I talked at length with Peter Loria, who is the founding business editor of BuzzFeed. And he talks about, well, we're doing real news, they're breaking news. He says, but we're covering things, we know who our audience is. So we are covering things where they begin with, we're covering them well, with depth, with perspective, but we're covering areas they're interested in. We're defining where, we know we're not going to be for the serious business person. We know we're not going to replace the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times or the business section of the New York Times, but we are going to be additive, and we're going to play to a market, and that doesn't mean being patronizing, but where they have real interest. They'll be, if they're covering, for example, the business of fashion, they'd be much more likely to cover what's going on at H&M, who owns H&M, or the parent company of Urban Outfitters, than they would JCPenney. I mean, and so I think it's in a sense, what you're doing is, to be successful, if there's a secret sauce to it, is to kind of know who your audience is, listen to what's important to them in their lives, and serve that, and to realize what they're going to respond to and what they're not going to get anywhere else.
And where do you think is there a place, and where is it, and maybe how is it, for that longer form investigative journalism? Is it, we've got a model of ProPublica, which is a kind of, again, sort of that foundation nonprofit approach to it. Is that what it takes? Is that just one of many? Again, it's easier, even in a short piece about H&M or et cetera, and as opposed to that long, in-depth, Pulitzer level investigation that's made so many journalists over the years.
I think that it will take a certain amount of investment. Some of that will come from, like with the ProPublica, will come from the nonprofit sector, and some of it will come from the BuzzFeeds of the world, and will continue to come from organizations like The Guardian and the New York Times, and some of it will just come, out of the seemingly out of the ether. Witness what's happened with the whole NSA scandal, and the world of WikiLeaks and the world of citizen journalism. It's all going to be a factor, and there's still going to be a need for expertise to curate, to act in a way that's responsible, that feels a connection, knows that by, in a sense, being responsible, you're protecting your brand, you're protecting your reputation. And when there's all that news out there, that's really important. We talked briefly earlier about Jeff Bezos coming in to the Washington Post. I find it interesting that one of the things he has said is, I'm going to give you a long runway. And I think that's what it takes. That's what it takes, and it's going to take time. And it's very tough when you live in a world where companies are, it's interesting, Howard, some of the companies that seem to be doing okay, of the legacy media companies, are ones that are privately held and aren't worrying about that next quarter. There's a lot of, in one of the oldest, most venerable media and entertainment companies in the world is Hearst. A lot of innovations coming out of Hearst. They are expanding their reach, and they bought, it was about a year and a half ago, they bought all the Hachette magazine brands. They see in emerging markets around the world, in a global economy, an opportunity to really grow their business that way, while other parts of it are being challenged. So, I mean, I think we're seeing certain solutions out there. We're seeing a certain amount of growth. It's still a painful time, don't get me wrong. I mean, we're in earnings season, and you see a lot of media companies taking a pretty strong hit.
What about, again, I'll go back to another, call it more traditional sector, cable news, which is almost an endless source of fodder for people writing about. We have the new book on Roger Ailes, and from Gabriel Sherman. What do you what's your take as a journalist who covers journalists of kind of the state of cable news? Is that in a transition itself? Is that now what, is sort of that what cable news is, in a sense?
I think that it is in a state of transition, and I think that we go more to how people consume news, which is mobile, that those legacy brands who have traditionally done very well, especially, when you look at a Fox News or you look at a CNBC, they've been slow in the digital world, and to maximize these wonderful brands they have, and these very strong personalities who attract a lot of audience and a lot of revenue. Let's be quite frank. I mean, it's interesting. Maria Bartiromo, who was the kind of, in a lot of ways, very identified for more than a decade with CNBC, a real strong personality. She's gone over to Fox News and Fox Business News. Fox Business News isn't getting any traction, really. And they announced, I think, yesterday that she's going to be doing an opening bell show. And I'm just, if I'm Fox News, I'm saying, man, let's push that out. Mobile, podcast. Let's go where my audience is. You know, make that available all the time. I mean, really make her a brand in the mobile world. And look at what other brands in the business space have done that have encroached on that business turf and go crazy with it. And it's true of CNBC too. This is the opportunity for those legacy brands. We're so flooded with news and information. We want those places, the names that we've learned to rely on. We're going to trust them to curate for us. So if they don't do this and don't really push the technology and invest in it now, boy, somebody else is going to sneak up. It's going to be like a BuzzFeed or somebody else who sneaks up and steals their lunch.
And they seem to have made, all of them, this decision, or certainly a movement that it's about opinion, and it's about a very strong point of view from your host, whether it's obviously Fox most famously, but certainly MSNBC has followed that model in prime time. CNN, maybe not as ideological, but searching for some of the same thing. Is there a place for what we used to call actually news, you know, which is the kind of the just the facts, ma'am, in that universe?
Well, you know, in that kind of opinionated news, I would throw in Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart. Seriously. Yeah. But in order to, yes, there is a place for it. Yes, there is a place in this world for those, you know, for that just scrappy, get out there, here's the news, here's what it is. Because otherwise, you can't come to that opinion news without a context. And it's just, it's different places. People have all sorts of opportunity to get at all sorts of places, whether it's All News Radio, whether it's, you know, whether it's NPR, whether it's you know, their Google or Yahoo newsfeed on their phone. I mean, there's all sorts of places to get that. I think what's really interesting is to see what a lot of cable networks do, and what Jeff Zucker's trying to do at CNN, is to go for real programming that's news-oriented. I mean, I think, you know, to be in business with Anthony Bourdain, No Destination, wonderful show. It's a wonderful show, and why isn't that part of news? I mean, that to me is like, I read the New York Times, and I might be reading a great story about what's going on in Iran, or a story about economic indicators, but I might also read, you know, a long takeout feature about what it's like to, you know, travel to in the depths of Nepal and to find the, you know, the ultimate whatever soup, right?
Well, how about what you know, the venerable evening news broadcast? And you wrote recently about what you called the Disneyfication, I think, if I got the right term,
yes,
of ABC News. And that is still a place where I think the 3 network news broadcasts get about 22 million, you know, households a night, or people a night, you know, viewing this. So there still is a lot of numbers, but what's your take on that, and sort of the content and the business model of that?
Well, I think that there still is a business model for it. I think that it's not what it once was. The margins aren't what they once were. You know, it does serve as kind of a headline service for people. If you look at the demographics of those 20-odd million people, they tend to be elderly. And you know, I think the importance of those kind of newscasts is going to continue its decline. Are they going to go away forever? No, they'll exist in some form. I mean, but it might be that it's Katie Couric you're watching do a show like that when you want to watch it, rather than Brian Williams or Diane Sawyer. I think there is a real Disneyfication of news going on, but there are so many options out there that if that's not what you want, it's the old story. You know, we used to say, be asked about this, this is going back a decade ago, I go, well, you vote with your remote. You also vote with your smartphone, you also vote with a click of your mouse. I mean, you've got all sorts of options out there, and it's tough. It's an incredibly competitive marketplace, and I do think, though, there is a market niche, as there always has been, for a strong brand that delivers high quality, and that there will be an audience that will pay a premium for it.
All right, so I'm going to put you on the spot, or maybe it's a free commercial for somebody out there. But we all can read so much. There's so much out there. When you want to know sort of the best of the news, and I don't mean, again, however you define it, and sort of what are the things you're reading that you feel like you got to read or consume every day? Well,
every day. I mean, I'm going to Twitter several times a day to see what the people I follow.
It's a good news feed for you.
It's a good news feed for me. There's also I use Facebook that way. I also have for my particular interests and writing and consulting about the industries I do. There's a number of curated newsletters that I get that are push emails. Mm-hmm. One's called Media Redefined. I Want Media is another one. And I use Flipboard, which in a way to kind of where I'm going through my morning reading and I'm putting stuff in on my iPad, making my own magazine, my own daily read, my own brief from all these things that I might not have time to read right then, but that I put together to go over. Also, I still look at the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal every day, but online. And it's rare that I'll pick them up. Other than that, I'm going to particular news sites where through this process of discovery, either through curated news feeds or what I'm seeing through social media.
And the role of the curator, obviously, is so critical. And now, one of the things you've been writing about recently is sort of this phenomenon of call it the individual brand or personal brand in news of these folks. You mentioned Ezra Klein.
Yeah.
Creating his own new journalistic enterprise, and his big piece in the New York Magazine for New Yorkers this week about that. Katie Couric going to Yahoo. David Pogue leaving to go to Yahoo from the New York Times. A number of those kinds of moves. What do you make of those? And either as an overall trend, or maybe there are specific ones in there that particularly strike you as interesting moves. But how do you see that, and where do you see that going?
I think in particular in particular sectors, like in the tech world, in the world of politics, in the world of entertainment. I mean, I think those have and sports. I think those brands have a lot of commerce, and I think that if those people land at organizations where there's a real understanding of the technology and the platform for that, and the understanding of the value of a marquee name, that there can be some viable businesses will come out of it. Some will succeed, some will fail. But I think that it's given the environment we live in, it's a smart strategy. There was a reason that Brian Stelter moved from the New York Times. From the New York Times to CNN,
right,
to host their media show. There's a reason CNN wanted Brian. Part of it is he's got hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. Now, he was able to accumulate those because of his aggressive use of social media, and he had the New York Times to make his brand. This is the same thing with David Pogue. How will others there fare? I mean, I was looking at Nicholas Kristof. I mean, Nick Kristof has something like 1.6 million, the Times columnist has 1.6 million viewers in social media. I mean, this makes him a brand. He's his own network. And anybody in this business of news, in the news and information economy, has to look at the value proposition of that. That's incredibly important. I'm consult a couple of media startups in different spaces, and what, one of the things that I tell them is look for those brands. Look if you're in X space, look on YouTube. Who's that 24-year-old who's getting 2 million hits? Look at those people. Now, there are exceptions to the millions and millions of people out there, but there's real value in that. There's real value in a way to cut through all the noise, that ton of content that's out there.
One of the kind of media sectors we haven't talked about that may not be directly in the business, but is sort of omnipresent, is the gatekeeper, the cable operators,
Right.
the satellite companies. Now that they're the broadband providers. Where do they fit into this scheme of thing? Do they get marginalized in your view of this? Do they remain critical? Do they become journalists in some sense themselves? How do you see them? Because they've always been such a big part of the whole discussion.
It used to be, we learned when we were in college or, about political economy, and, Karl Marx said that that power lies in the means of production. Well, production got really cheap, the business of news, information, entertainment. And then I used to always think that in the days of the real powerhouses where cable was huge, almost like a monopoly, and they could extract all sorts of deals from people who wanted distribution, that it was those who had the power, those who had the means of distribution. That's changed a great deal. It's not as monolithic as it once was, and I think there's a real challenge. There's a real challenge. It's, for 18 months, the number of cable subscribers has decreased. We see more and more competition. The telcos getting into it. Certainly, satellite's still a factor. There's the cord cutters. There's all sorts of things. So I don't know who wins, but this is really something to keep a very close eye on. And there's so much that goes into it. What happens in a regulatory environment, what happens, we can get into all sorts of archaic stuff about the technology changing, with the signal compression, all sorts of stuff. So that's the role is definitely changing of those distributors. They still have a lot of clout, but where it goes, man, that is the 100 billion. That's the $1 trillion question.
We'll come back as soon as we've solved that one. We'll come back for our second show on that. So with that, I want to thank Max Robbins for being my guest this evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Howard Homanoff. Good night.